1. Hello, history people. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 4, Section 1, and the coming of the Civil War. Okay, so the Civil War is a long time coming. It's not just one event that stimulates the fighting between the states. It's an actual culmination of many events that happen over 30, 40, 50 years of time. So since the beginning of the country, slavery has always been the issue that has divided sections of the country amongst each other. Okay, we got to understand the economy in the South depends on slavery in order to survive, while the industrialized North does not depend on slavery. They depend on immigration in order to get their jobs done in the factories. Many slave owners would point to the northern factory system and say that that is actually abusive towards those workers, as they are barely fed and treated harshly, and that is in much worse than slaves are treated in plantations. So, but the bottom line is, slaves were not free. They were not allowed to come and go as they wanted, and that was probably the biggest distinction between wage slaves, that's the name for the workers in the North, and the actual slaves in the South. Okay. So the problems that we're going to talk about all encompass the idea of expanding slavery beyond its borders as it sits at that time. Okay, the first problem, we already talked about this in class, is California. We talked about gold rush. People went out to California to try to get the gold, and through that, California became a very populous place, and they wanted to become a state. Problem again, when a new state was brought into the Union, it was going to throw off the sectional balance. It's going to throw off the Senate, giving one side more power than the other. So that was the problem. So California wants to come in as a free state, which angers the South, and so back and forth. This whole controversy threatens to split the country apart. So Henry Clay comes up with the idea of the Compromise of 1850, which is a bunch of legislation that basically holds the country together for about 10 years. Okay, the Compromise of 1850 has something for both sides. It brings in California as a free state. It gives the South a tougher fugitive slave law, which makes it mandatory that Northerners actually help enforce and return fugitive or escaped slaves back to slavery. The North is very upset about this, but the South thinks that it's the one thing that will keep everyone together. Popular sovereignty becomes the rule in states like New Mexico and Utah, that people that live there will be able to decide how they will want to live, with most people understanding that in those states it's not probably very profitable to have slaves there. So the Fugitive Slave Act, like I said before, was something that the Northerners did not like. They did not want to help return escaped slaves back to slavery. So if you help slaves escape or refuse to help find them, you could be imprisoned or fined. And those that were caught or accused of being escaped slaves, they were not given a jury trial. They were actually brought up to a magistrate whose only job was to decide if someone was a fugitive slave or if they were a freeman. And they got more money to decide if someone was an escaped slave than they did if they decided they were a freeman. So you can imagine how that went. So Northerners defy that fugitive slave law, which really makes Southerners upset. Part of that escape, or helping slaves escape, includes the Underground Railroad, where they would move a series of roads and trails and houses. They would be able to move slaves from the South to the North and into Canada for their freedom. One of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad is Harriet Tubman, who made the trip many times and helped lots of people to escape. Another splitting point between the North and the South, the slavery and free state divide, was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which attempted to tell the story of what being a slave was like, everything from harsh labor, harsh treatment, to be sold away from your family, to the idea that you really don't own your own soul if you're a slave. And people in the North took that to be, well, this is a realistic outlook of what slaves' lives are like, even though Harriet Beecher Stowe had only been to one plantation in her life. Southerners, on the other hand, were absolutely incensed by this book and refused to allow it to be brought into the South. So we said before, the Missouri Compromise held the country together for about 10 years. It does. Another part of that is the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Kansas and Nebraska were territories in the former Louisiana Purchase, and they were ready to become states, or at least territories. A plan was concocted by a Stephen Douglas, a senator from Illinois, to allow those two places to decide if they wanted to be free or slave by popular sovereignty. So the 3630 line is broken. The Missouri Compromise is broken, which had always been seen as a sacred pact between the North and the South. But with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it invalidates the Missouri Compromise. So people that went to Kansas to move when they were ready to become a state, they were going to vote on if they were going to be free or slave. Many, they call them border ruffians from Missouri, came over the border of Kansas to try to vote, and they did vote, and they were overwhelmingly made Kansas a slave state. Well, the majority of the people in Kansas did not want slavery, and so fighting ensued, and it became known as Bleeding Kansas, okay? And it was a fraudulent victory, and so Kansas never does come into the Union as a slave state. This news of Bleeding Kansas comes back to Washington, D.C., where a senator, Charles Sumner, gives a verbal attack on slavery, and those senators and congressmen that practice slavery. One person in particular, a representative by the name of Preston Brooks, goes into the Senate chamber and beats Charles Sumner over the head with a cane until it breaks. Charles Sumner is severely injured and is sent home. Okay, and Preston Brooks he resigns from Congress and goes home as well. To show the different outlooks on this situation, Charles Sumner is actually reelected, even though he can't go to Washington, D.C. He's reelected by his constituents, and Preston Brooks is sent more canes to finish the job, as they would say, because the people in the South agreed with his sentiments. Okay. In 1852, the Democrats bring up and present Franklin Pierce as their presidential nominee because he was friendly to slavery, wasn't offensive really. He's from the North, but he was going to protect slavery, and so the Democrats in the North and the South vote for him, and he wins. The Whigs party kind of splits over the slavery issue around this time. So you have Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs, which makes them a weaker party. Is Franklin Pierce. Okay. People in the North, people that work for wages, believe that if slavery is ended, that they might actually bring down wages in the North because of the pool of workers will increase so much that employers will not have to pay people as much to get the job done. So in 1854, in opposition to the expansion of slavery into the territories, many former Whigs and other different splinter groups of parties formed together to form the new Republican Party, and that's their number one platform, is to oppose slavery in the territories. Not to touch it where it is, but to oppose its expansion. So in 1856, the Democrats bring another pro-slavery individual, James Buchanan, into office, and that'll be the last united Democrat election that we'll see for a while, as James Buchanan becomes president in 1856, and the southern states believe that he will not touch slavery, therefore they agree to it. So during Buchanan's presidency, the Dred Scott decision is made. Dred Scott was a slave that was brought into free territory for a number of years, believed that would make him free. So a slave brought to free land should be made free is his idea. He takes his case all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney decides, number one, that this case can't actually be tried because as a black man, Dred Scott is not a citizen, and therefore the Constitution does not apply to him. Number two, Taney rules that property is property, whether it be a horse or a slave, and there are no restrictions on you taking your property between states. So Taney believed that he had solved the problem once and for all, although he actually increased the problem overall. So around the same time, Senator Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln are both running for Senate. Douglas is a Democrat, Lincoln's a Republican, and they go around the state of Illinois in a series of debates where they discuss, amongst other things, slavery and popular sovereignty. Lincoln and the Republicans believe that slavery is immoral, and he believes that it should not be spread into other territories. Stephen Douglas believes in popular sovereignty and that people should be able to decide. Okay? His idea of popular sovereignty rather than the Supreme Court ruling is what's going to ruin Stephen Douglas in the eyes of the Southerners, and they will not vote for him in the election of 1860. Also in this time period, John Brown leads a slave uprising. John Brown became famous originally for leading a group of anti-slavery people into Kansas during the Bleeding Kansas time and hacking many pro-slavery settlers to death with broadswords. And he left there and he got the idea to try to start a slave rebellion by arming slaves and having them then fight for their own freedom. So he gets a band of people together. They invade and take over an arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Eventually the military is called out, is put down. Brown is tried and is eventually executed. But he becomes a martyr, okay? And he becomes a martyr for the anti-slavery cause, and many paintings like the one on the screen right now are made about him. So in 1860, the election takes place. We talked about Stephen Douglas not getting the support of the South. They actually ran a different candidate for president in the South. Abraham Lincoln doesn't appear on the ballot in the South, but he's able to carry enough states with the Electoral College to become president in 1860. And so between the time he gets elected in November until the March inauguration, I think 11 states will secede from the Union and decide that they want to go out on their own. And so next chapter we'll talk about that more. So until then, keep reading, keep learning. Bye.